the nameless in the mirror. There is something unnerving about reflections. They are meant to mimic us perfectly, to give back what we show them without question, without delay. Yet I've always distrusted mirrors. They hold too much silence, too much possibility. When you look into one, you are not just staring at yourself. You are staring into a place that has no depth, no end, and no certainty that what is staring back is truly you. The mirror in my room wasn't remarkable at first glance. An old, full-length piece framed in tarnished wood, its surface warped with the faint haze of age. It leaned slightly against the wall, as though it had been forgotten there for decades. When I moved into the house, it was already in the bedroom, too large and heavy for me to bother moving. It seemed harmless enough, at least until I began to notice the differences. The first time was subtle. I had just woken from a restless sleep, the morning light filtering through my curtains in pale ribbons. I stood before the mirror, rubbing my eyes, when I noticed my reflection wasn't in sync. The movement was small, a delayed blink, the faint twitch of a hand moving slower than it should have. I told myself I was tired, still shaking off dreams, but the image clung to me long after. That night, I avoided the mirror. I kept the lights dim, the curtains shut, and I tried not to glance at the dark shape waiting in the glass. But the thing about mirrors is that they draw you in. Even when you try not to look, your eyes betray you, sliding across the surface, catching the faint glimmer of your own shape. And that's when I saw it again. Not a mistake this time. My reflection smiled before I did. A slow, deliberate curl of the lips, out of rhythm with my own frozen face. I stepped back, chest tight, but the reflection only tilted its head, a fraction too far, the way no neck should bend. Its eyes followed me with an intensity that felt alive. That night I dragged an old sheet across the glass, covering it completely. But mirrors do not stop existing when you cover them. They still wait, still breathe, just beyond the thin veil of fabric. I could feel it every time I walked past, the weight of that presence pressing against the cloth. Sometimes the sheet shifted as though pulled from within. A faint outline bulged against it, stretching outward before sinking back into stillness. Days turned heavy with unease. The smell began first, a faint sweetness like rotting fruit, mingled with something metallic and sharp. It grew stronger near the mirror, clinging to the edges of the fabric. I kept the window open, but the stench lingered, creeping into my lungs until sleep became sour and restless. At night, I heard faint tapping, a soft, rhythmic sound, as though fingernails dragged across glass. Not loud enough to mistake for anything else, but insistent enough to remind me it was waiting. I would lie in bed, staring at the sheet, watching it tremble slightly with each sound. One night, I woke to silence, a silence so deep it felt unnatural, as if the house itself was holding its breath. The sheet had fallen. I don't remember hearing it slide, don't remember seeing it drop, but there it was, pooled on the floor like discarded skin. The mirror stood exposed, pale light from the moon spilling across its surface. I should have seen my reflection lying there in bed, wide-eyed and trembling. But the glass was empty. It was worse than seeing something unnatural inside. The absence was unbearable. A void where I should have been, a blank canvas waiting to be filled. I wanted to look away, but the emptiness drew me closer, like a mouth pulling me in. As I leaned forward, my reflection flickered into view. Not me as I was, but me distorted. My skin too pale, my eyes too dark, my mouth stretched wider than it should be. It moved slowly, rising from the bottom of the mirror as though climbing up from some hidden depth. I couldn't breathe. The air was thick with that sweet metallic stench, my throat burning as I tried to swallow it down. My reflection stood there perfectly still, its head tilted at that unnatural angle, lips twitching as though forming words I couldn't hear. And then it moved again, faster this time, pressing its hand against the glass. Pale fingers smudged the surface from the other side, long and thin, the nails too sharp. The glass rippled faintly, like water disturbed. I stumbled back, but the image pressed harder. The glass groaned, a low sound that echoed through the room, vibrating in my bones. Its mouth opened wide, impossibly wide, until the skin at its cheeks split into dark cracks. No sound came from it, but I felt the weight of its silence pressing against me like a scream without air. I ran. I left the room, slamming the door behind me, but the mirror stayed inside. Yet leaving it there didn't stop the presence. Wherever I went in that house, I felt it. Reflections in windows lingered too long. The dark surface of my phone screen sometimes showed a face that wasn't mine, one that smiled when I didn't. Sleep became impossible. I covered every reflective surface, but it didn't matter. The smell followed me, the faint tapping never stopped. Sometimes, I woke with the taste of glass dust in my mouth, as though I had been breathing too close to the surface of the mirror while I slept. The final night came without warning. I woke to a pressure on my chest, heavy and suffocating. My eyes adjusted to the dark, and I saw it. Not in the mirror anymore, but crouched over me, its face inches from mine. Skin pale as ash, eyes hollow and black, mouth open in that endless, silent scream. Its fingers pressed against my ribs, sharp and cold, and I smelled the sweetness of rot so strongly it coated my tongue. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. It leaned closer, its mouth stretching impossibly wide until darkness filled my vision. For a moment, I felt myself falling, not into sleep, but into that endless depth behind the glass. When I woke, the room was empty. The mirror stood covered again, though I never remembered replacing the sheet. The smell had faded, the tapping gone. But I know it isn't over. Sometimes when I pass a reflective surface, I catch it. A flicker in the corner of my eye. A smile forming before mine. A head tilting too far. And every time, I wonder how long it will take before the nameless thing in the mirror decides that it doesn't need the glass anymore. Buried voices. The ground around my new home never seemed to rest. The soil looked ordinary from a distance, dark earth, scattered with stubborn weeds, broken up by patches of gravel. But the longer I lived there, the more I began to notice its unease. It shifted, ever so slightly, as though it were breathing. Sometimes it bulged in small rises, Sometimes it sank in shallow dips, and sometimes it trembled beneath my feet like something restless moved beneath the surface. At first, I told myself it was nothing. Old land often hides veins of water, roots stretching deep, small animals carving their tunnels in secret. But there was something about this ground that felt heavier, something that suggested weight far greater than worms or water. The air above it was always colder than the rest of the yard, and the smell, that faint, bitter tang of wet earth mixed with something sharper, something metallic, like iron left too long in the rain. The house itself wasn't new, but it had been patched together enough times to appear whole. Peeling paint, warped window frames, carpets worn smooth by years of footsteps. It was not the house that disturbed me, it was the land it stood upon. Every night, the silence of the countryside should have been comforting. Instead, it made the smallest sounds sharper. The insects fell quiet all at once, leaving an emptiness that pressed too heavily against my ears. The wind rattled the brittle stalks of weeds like dry bones clattering together. And beneath it all, if I listened carefully enough, I heard it, the faint murmur of voices. Not clear words, not sentences, just whispers threading through the soil, muffled and broken, as though the earth itself were trying to speak. The first time I noticed it, I thought it was the wind. I stood in the yard, moonlight silvering the ground, and heard a faint hum beneath me. I held my breath, waiting, and the hum broke into tones low, trembling sounds that reminded me of someone struggling to speak through dirt-packed lungs. The voices shifted, overlapping, too many at once to separate, each pressing against the other in a chorus of suffocation. I backed away that night, but the voices did not leave me. Inside the house, their muffled tones still seeped through the floorboards. At first, they were faint, just enough to make me pause when the house was quiet. But as the days passed, they grew clearer, stronger, until it felt as though the ground was vibrating with sound. The smell grew stronger too. Not just wet earth anymore, but the sweetness of decay, faint but unmistakable, curling through the air whenever the soil trembled. It clung to my clothes, to the fabric of the curtains, to my sheets as I lay awake listening to the hum rise into murmurs. Sleep was fractured. I would wake to the sound of movement in the yard, the soil shifting, gravel grinding, the faint gasp of voices rising as though stirred awake. Sometimes the sound came from beneath my bed, vibrating up through the frame, a faint chorus of breath pressing against my ears. I tried to tell myself it was imagination, the tricks of a mind too willing to find horror in silence. But then I began to see the soil move with my own eyes. At dusk, when the sky bruised with the last of the sun, I would watch the earth ripple. Tiny mounds swelled, then sank again, as though something beneath were pressing upward. Cracks spread across the dirt, faint and shallow, then sealed themselves again as if hiding the disturbance. And sometimes, when the moonlight was sharp enough, I swore I saw pale shapes just beneath the surface, slivers of something too smooth, too straight, like the curve of bone pressed close to breaking free. I told myself not to look, not to listen, but avoidance only made it worse. The voices grew bolder at night, rising from murmurs into broken gasps, each one pressing against the other until I could almost form the shapes of words. They were not words I knew, but they clawed at me, dragging against my ears, my chest, until I could hardly breathe. One night, I made the mistake of stepping outside when the voices were loudest. The soil was damp, the air heavy with the smell of rot. I stood there, heart hammering, as the ground trembled beneath my feet. The whispers surged, overlapping in waves, until it felt like I was standing over a graveyard of mouths, all screaming in silence. And then I heard one, clearer than the rest. Not a word, but a cry. Long, hollow, dragged up from deep beneath the earth. It scraped against my bones, a sound that had no place above ground. I stumbled back toward the house, but the ground moved again, swelling upward in small rises, cracking open just enough to release a breath of air that stank of old death and burned iron. I fled inside, slamming the door, but the voices followed. They rose through the floor, rattling through the wood, climbing into the walls. That night I didn't sleep at all. The days that followed blurred together, but the ground never rested. The soil shifted constantly, whispering, sighing, pressing upward as though eager to break free. I avoided looking out the windows at night, afraid of what I might see rising through the dirt. But the voices would not stop. They filled the house, pressing against me, until I could hardly think. And then came the night it broke open. A storm rolled across the land, rain soaking the ground, thunder splitting the silence. I tried to tell myself the storm would drown the whispers, wash away the stench, settle the restless soil. But instead, the rain made it worse. The water softened the earth, loosening it, opening it. I heard it before I saw it. The voices rose in unison, no longer muffled, but clear, broken cries tearing through the night. I looked out the window, lightning splitting the sky, and I saw the ground opening. Cracks spread like veins, soil collapsing inward as pale shapes pushed upward. Hands. Not whole, not living, but pale, broken, clawing hands. They tore through the mud, dragging themselves upward, mouths opening in screams I couldn't hear, but could feel vibrating in my skull. I stumbled back from the window, but the floor beneath me trembled. The voices surged, pressing through the wood, through the walls, filling every corner of the house. I clamped my hands over my ears, but it didn't matter. The sound was inside me now, clawing at my mind, tearing through my thoughts. The smell was unbearable, wet soil, rotting flesh, iron thick enough to choke me. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, as the ground outside split wider, the pale shapes pulling themselves free, rising with mouths stretched too wide, voices spilling from them in endless cries. I fled. I don't remember how. I remember the rain, the mud, the weight of the voices pressing behind me as I stumbled into the night. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I left the house behind, but I can still feel the voices. Even now, in the stillness of another place, I hear them at night. The faint murmur pressing beneath the ground, waiting, patient. Because once you hear them, once you've stood above that restless soil and felt the voices clawing against you, you never escape them. You carry them with you. And when I close my eyes at night, when I press my head to the pillow and try to breathe, I swear I feel the ground shift beneath me again. The buried voices are still there, waiting,